Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eve Samples, Executive Director of Friends of the Everglades. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today to our latest clean water conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about Senate Bill 2508. This is a piece of legislation that has consumed a lot of time, a lot of brain power of environmentalists and others around the state over the last few weeks, and we want to help you understand it today. So I'm happy to have you here. Friends of the Everglades hosts these events so that we can help people understand complex issues. We've done this for the last 2 years, and we intend to continue it. And it's my pleasure to welcome our guests today. First, I want to welcome Jackie Thurlow-Lippisch. Jackie is a member of the governing board of the South Florida Water Management District. She's also author of the blog Indian River Lagoon, which offers really beautiful historical context on a special estuary in Florida. She's former member of Florida's Constitution Revision Commission and former mayor and commissioner of the town of Sewell's Point. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Next, we have Royal Gardner. He's a professor of law at Stetson and director of Stetson's Institute of Biodiversity Law and Policy. He is an international expert in wetland law and policy, and his research focuses on U.S. and international wetland legal and policy issues with an emphasis on biodiversity offsets. He's also a member of Friends of the Everglades Science and Policy Committee. Roy, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Okay. And last but not least, we have Gil Smart. Gil was a journalist for 30 years before joining Friends of the Everglades as policy director last year. And he also wears a second hat as executive director of Vote Water. Welcome, Gil.
Thank you much.
All right, great. So before we dive into the topic at hand today, I just want to take a minute to recognize an icon that we lost over the weekend, Maggie Herchala. Maggie, like Roy, was a member of our Science and Policy Committee and really had a gift for helping people understand the complexities of environmental regulations, of helping people understand how to engage in them. And it's amazing, since Maggie passed away on Saturday, how many people I've talked to who have said, oh, I was just emailing with Maggie about this comp plan amendment, or I was just emailing with Maggie about this legislation. And the breadth of her involvement in the environmental movement in Florida just really can't be overstated. And I find it very meaningful that we're here today helping people understand a complex environmental issue, because I think it's what Maggie would have done and what she would have wanted. So we'll carry on in her spirit today. So on that note, Gil, before I turn it to you, I just want to say that there has been a litany of bad environmental legislation filed this session in Tallahassee. I've heard some people describe it as the worst year yet in terms of environmental legislation. I feel like that is said every year during session, so it is a little hard to differentiate. But nonetheless, Senate Bill 2508 dropped on a Friday afternoon several weeks ago without heads up to impacted agencies, as we're going to discuss today, without input from environmental advocates like us or others, and really was a surprise attack, I think is a good way to characterize it. So this year has felt different. We've had other priorities that we've tracked at Friends of the Everglades, a few bad bills. You can go to everglades.org and read about them on our website. But this is the one we're going to focus on today. We want you to know where it stands, how you can make your voice heard on it, and what you can do to help kill what remains a concerning bill. So Gil, tell us about how it came to life, how this bill changed forms, and where we are now, if you would.
I found out about this on a Friday, February 4th at 3 p.m. I got an email from you. I guess we'd gotten an inquiry from the media. This bill had just dropped, and media folks were saying, what do you make of this? And so the question was, what do you make of this? This came out of the blue with no notification, as Jackie will later attest to. And sort of the quick thumbnail analysis, as I read it, it was like, you got to be kidding. You got to be kidding. You got to be kidding. First cursory reading, it was clear this bill was bad news on a lot of fronts. The sponsor was Senator Ben Albritton, and it reportedly had the full backing of Senate President Wilton Simpson, who's almost certain to be Florida's next agricultural secretary. It had been filed as what's called a budget conforming bill. Okay, and a budget conforming bill is not supposed to include significant policy changes. It's supposed to be about how the state spends its money. But again, sort of, just an initial analysis of this. I mean, it was clear that this represented significant policy changes. I'll thumbnail a few of them here, and Eve, stop me if I go too long because we could dive down the rabbit hole on this really. But the initial bill would have forced the South Florida Water Management District to make recommendations to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in terms of how Lake Okeechobee water is managed that prioritized water supply. And when I say water supply, there's a lot of people or organizations that fall into that category. It includes the city of West Palm Beach. It includes municipal water users, but primarily or largely, it is for water supply for the agricultural interests south of Lake Okeechobee. Think the sugar industry. Okay, think big sugar when I say water supply. Not the only one, but a huge user of water. Okay, this would have required the district to make recommendations about the management of the lake in the interests, first and foremost, of water supply, of big sugar. It was an end run around the 3-year Lowson process. The Army Corps has taken that much time. There have been dozens of meetings, thousands of comments, hundreds of thousands of model runs, in an effort for the Army Corps of Engineers to come up with a new balanced Lake Okeechobee system operating manual. This was an attempt to do an end run around all of that. Original language in the bill would have handcuffed the Water Management District, requiring any recommendation to make to the Corps that would to ensure that it would not, quote, diminish the quantity of water available to existing legal users like Big Sugar, or otherwise adversely impact existing legal users like Big Sugar. The district would have had to certify to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House that this was the case. If not, the state could withhold funding on Everglades restoration projects, some of which are already in progress. Work on these SERP projects, Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan projects, might have had to grind to a halt. The result of these measures would certainly amount to keeping more water in the lake than is necessary, potentially cutting off flows to the Everglades and increasing the chances of discharges during the wet season and another algae crisis, both here on the East Coast and the West Coast. The bill also would have diluted the pool of funding, available for the reservoir being built in the EAA, the Everglades Agricultural Area, by making other projects eligible for the same pool of funding. And language in the bill stipulated that hundreds of millions of dollars in restoration projects would not be released until and unless the bill was passed. Okay, so that's, that was, and that's just the Everglades restoration aspect of this bill. Excuse me. There's other problems with it as well. It has to do with wetlands permitting, the wetlands permitting process, proposed expansion of the rural and family lands preservation program. But this is what got our attention, being in the Everglades, business, so to speak. But because it was filed as a budget conforming bill, okay, there was going to be but one chance for the public to comment on this. It was it dropped on a Friday, February 4th. Just a few days later, February 9th, Wednesday, February 9th, it was going before the Florida Senate Appropriations Committee. That was going to be the only chance anyone had to weigh in on this, okay? It really does look like that was intentional. As the head of one environmental group told our local media, TC Palm, conforming bills, quote, are a great tool for legislators that want to sneak controversial policy into law with limited public input and no chance for amendment. So that sole hearing before the committee, just several days later, I was there. Several dozens of fishing guides mobilized by a group called Captains for Clean Water were there, as were other environmental groups. The pushback was significant, and I think it took the senators by surprise. I don't think they believed that there would be time to organize such resistance. They complained that the public was misinformed. They sneered at those who hadn't checked the cross-references or didn't know by heart the related legislation cited in the bill. They basically belittled people. They basically disrespected the people who had driven 6, even 8 hours just to be there and just to have their say. Yeah. So the bill passed the Senate Appropriations Committee nonetheless by a vote of 16-4. But it was clear the opposition was growing stronger. Subsequently, Albritton and Simpson blinked. I think you could say that they blinked. Albritton proposed an amendment that strips much of the worst provisions out of the bill, left a lot of bad stuff in. And the full Senate approved this bill, and then it went to the House yesterday, February 22nd. The House passed what's called a strike-all amendment, which basically wiped the slate clean. then pass the bill. This doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense. It's a procedural move. And the whole idea is now this goes to budget conference, where the Senate and the House and the governor put their heads together and kind of come up with a final budget document. We are hearing anecdotally that meetings are already taking place between Senate and House leaders to hammer this out. What emerges from this entire process could include the entirety of what was passed by the Senate. It could lose some of those provisions. It could gain provisions. But ultimately, what comes out of conference will be the budget bill. There's going to be no opportunity for the public to weigh in on this. The only thing that can happen to derail this at that point, if this bill contains these objectionable provisions, is if Governor DeSantis were to veto it.
Really excellent summary, Gil, that I'm going to try to distill into its essence. So, bad bill filed with a lot of substantial policy changes attached to the budget. Bill was amended, still has some bad things, took out arguably the worst, but still has some really bad things. Friends of the Everglades remains opposed. Now it's been wrapped into the budget, heads into budget conferencing, where not only will the public not have an opportunity to comment, we won't even get to see the deliberations because these will occur behind closed doors. And the only option to kill it, if this bill persists, will be for a full veto of the entire budget by the governor. So that's where we are today. And it's complex, but we just want to make it crystal clear. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to tackle those at the end. So, Jackie, I really want to hear from you about how this landed, how you learned about it, and what your initial take was of the bill and how you're feeling about it now.
Well, governing board members are briefed before a governing board meeting, and it's very extensive. It can last an hour to an hour and a half, and you go through everything that will be on the agenda. Well, when I plugged in for my briefing, I could tell that something serious had occurred. And our executive director, Drew Bartlett, said, "Ms. Thurlow, I've got something I've got to talk to you about first." And so that was the first time that I'd heard about it. And then, of course, because of the Sunshine Law, we're not allowed to talk about these things altogether. Mr. Bartlett and staff had to speak individually to each of the 9 members. And, you just, like Gil Smart said, I mean, you're just flabbergasted. I was just thinking, you've got to be kidding me. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, remembering what happened with House Bill 5003 with 40E61, which was a Florida process for Florida code, where we were trying to be basically stricter with runoff from farms and developments. And it was cut in the bud at the last minute. And that entailed about a year of work for the district. I mean, going around, meeting with groups, staff's time, working in Tallahassee, the whole thing. And I was rudely awakened to that kind of thing. And so I wasn't totally surprised once I got over the initial shock of what had happened in this bill, because these people in Tallahassee are playing hardball.
So the bill was amended to clean up some of the language regarding funding of the EAA reservoir, and the worst of the language about the new Lake Okeechobee plan was also removed. Some assurances related to 1 in 10 year certainty and other language. However, we remain concerned about some of the rules in the bill that would be enshrined into law if this passes as amended. These are water shortage rules of the Water Management District, 40E 21 and 22. They govern how the district makes releases when the lake gets low. Right now, they heavily prioritize the sugar industry because they're guaranteed water. They don't receive cutbacks, whereas the environment and others do receive cutbacks as we approach drought conditions. So Jackie, how are you feeling about this now that it's evolved?
I don't even look at the amendment. I'm just looking at the original bill, because this isn't done. You don't know what's happening. until the very end. And this whole thing was, if you look at the way government is organized, the districts, the water management districts fall under the executive branch. Okay, so you have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And so you have DEP and the water management districts under the executive branch. So this shenanigans was a complete affront to Governor DeSantis, because we fall under Governor DeSantis in the organizational chart. And we will not make any comment. I will not make any comment saying that I feel better about anything, because I don't. I am still looking at the original problems, to think that the water management district would be held hostage and not receive funding for CERT projects unless the district conforms. And that's basically still in there. In any case, it is a terrible bill that is wants the district to be like a rubber stamp to the legislature, and that's not how it works. Organizationally, we fall under the governor. And so, as you said, this will go into conference, and Governor DeSantis has the final decision.
That makes sense. And I do think it's wise of you not to let your guard down in terms of all of the provisions that were in the original version of the bill. We do remain opposed because of those water shortage rules I mentioned, and some rural and family land program changes that are concerning. And also because of what the bill in its original form and its amended form would do to what's known as 404 wetland permitting.
Absolutely.
Yep. So Roy, who's here with us today, is an expert on 404 wetland permitting. Roy, I'm going to ask you just to start by defining what 404 wetland permitting is. I think a lot of people won't know, and that'd be really useful.
Sure. A 404 permit is a type of permit under the Federal Clean Water Act. So the Federal Clean Water Act prohibits the point source discharge of pollutants into a navigable water, which includes wetlands and streams. It's defined rather broadly. Now, you might think, okay, pollutants, you're talking about chemicals coming out of the end of a pipe, and those are prohibited without a Section 402 permit. So that would be a permit issued by the EPA or a state with an EPA-approved program. But pollutants also cover dredged material or clean dirt or earth that are used to fill in wetlands and streams. So there are water quality impacts when you eliminate a water body from the landscape. And so when you're filling in a water body, you need a Section 404 permit. And that is issued by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or a state with an EPA-approved program.
Okay, very helpful background, and your professorial explanations are really useful. Thank you. It's easy for the layman to understand. So tell us now what this bill would do, what it would change about how the state is now implementing 404 wetland permits.
So the Clean Water Act has this concept of cooperative federalism where the feds and the state work together. And so states can assume the responsibility to issue a 404 program, basically take over the federal program. So Florida became the third state after Minnesota and New Jersey to assume responsibility for the Section 404 program. So they assumed it in the waning days of the Trump administration in January of 2021. So that means that Florida DEP now has the authority and the responsibility to evaluate federal Section 404 permits that will allow the discharge of dredged or fill material into wetlands and streams. But Florida really wasn't ready to assume the 404 program in a couple of ways. Number one, the Clean Water Act assigns the state's primary responsibility to deal with non-point source discharges. That is like a runoff from agricultural lands, and we know the state has failed to deal with that, and how that runoff has contributed to harmful algal blooms. So putting that aside, that the state really wasn't dealing with its primary responsibility, the DEP also was not properly staffed to deal with the Section 404 permit applications. And so since they're overwhelmed, the legislature has said, well, let's come up with another way to sort of help out the agency. And one way would be to hire more people. But the way that they're doing it is through a provision in this bill that would allow DEP to enter into agreements with electric utilities. And on the one hand, it could be viewed that this will allow these utilities to pay for positions to review permits. On the other hand, it's the language is not that tight. So the staff analysis of this provision of the bill says, well, this is very similar to a federal law. And indeed, there is a federal law that allows natural gas companies and public utilities to essentially fund the processing of permits. But it's very specific that they're talking about just the funding. Basically, you're charging a permittee to have to pay for the expenses associated with the evaluation of the permit. The language in the Florida bill actually talks about the department entering into an agreement with a utility that includes electric utilities to expedite the evaluation of ERPs and Section 404 permits. It later says that the DEP may receive funds pursuant to one of these agreements. The implication is that these agreements can be broader than simply accepting funds. And so there's some ambiguity here in terms of whether this would give DEP the authority to outsource actual evaluation of these permits to other public entities, including electric utilities. If that's not the intent, if the intent is they just want to have the utilities pay more, that's imprecise drafting, which I think is probably a consequence of trying to speed this through.
Interesting. And say they cleaned it up and drafted it better. What do you see as the possible consequences of having a utility, let's just use FPL as an example, as a paying customer for its own permit review?
So one of the problems with that is the agency then begins to see the utility, the permittee, as a customer to be served, as opposed to focusing on what should be the agency's primary mission, which is to protect water resources for the benefit of the public at large.
That makes sense. And one kind of small thing in the bill that I noticed is it says that these agreements have to be for 3 years. What's that all about? Does that make any sense to you, that duration?
It may be if it's focused on the funding, that it provides a source of funding for a period of years so that the agency can plan.
Okay. Thank you for helping us understand that part of it. And this is why attaching this complex policy bill to the budget just makes no sense. You know, most bills that attack substantial policy or address substantial policy go through multiple committee hearings, usually 3, and we can vet these and as the public bring our concerns in front of lawmakers. And that just simply didn't happen, except for the one hearing that Gil mentioned that many people traveled to Tallahassee for. And to be honest, that focused almost entirely on the Everglades provisions, not this 404 wetland permitting concern, which is a major concern.
That's
so
right.
Thank you, Roy. So we're starting to get some questions in the comments. And Gil, I think I'm going to toss this to you. We'll tackle some questions as we go, as well as at the end. So there's a question here from Charles Grandy, who asks, once the committee has finalized the bill, can the governor veto it, or would he have to veto the entire budget if he wished to kill this bill? You want to answer that?
I believe the answer to that is he would have to veto the entire budget. You know, and again, there's going to be no opportunity for the public to weigh in on, you know, what ultimately this looks like. The ball's going to be in the governor's court at that point, and that's that's a pretty big ask to ask him to veto the entire budget, just to kill this. But that's kind of how this process works. And this is, I've been saying this, for days. This is kind of a case study in dishonest government, because as you just said, normally major policy proposals such as the ones contained in these bills go through the normal committee process. And there would be plenty of opportunities for the public to weigh in, and there would be plenty of opportunities to sort of, change the bill or amend the bill to address some of the ambiguities that remain, as Roy just talked about, but that it was done this way is suggestive of the fact that, there was very little interest in providing the public with ample opportunity to comment on this,
Right.
And just to go back to, what we were talking about with Jackie, that was one of the most surprising aspects of this initially, was the fact that here's a bill that would impose huge new requirements and regulations on the South Florida Water Management District, and nobody at the South Florida Water Management District knew a thing about it.
Heard.
It totally took them all by surprise.
Zero.
And at the hearing, Chauncey Goss, who's the chair of the board, got up there, and he seemed like just to use Jackie's term, flabbergasted that this was happening, and that the agency appointed by the governor, that would have to be handcuffed by all these proposed regulations, they found out about it Friday, like we did, just what, three business days before the actual hearing. So the process here, if you were looking, and to use Governor DeSantis's term, rammed through, this was being rammed through. If you wanted to ram through legislation with a minimum opportunity for the public to scrutinize it, this is exactly how you do it.
Right. I want to take one other question now from Mo, who asks, does anyone know the governor's reaction to this bill at this time? I'll tackle that one. So the governor's office is saying there's no deal. So when Senate President Wilton Simpson rolled out the amended version of the bill last week, he or his staff characterized it as a deal has been reached. The governor said there's no deal. So either he disagrees with the amended version or he's playing his cards very close to the vest. Let's just make clear who the players are, the biggest players are. So right now, Senate President Wilton Simpson, this is his chamber driving this bill, goes into budget conferencing with House Speaker Chris Sprowls. Okay, so those two are going to hash it out. We don't have any reason to believe that this legislation is any kind of priority for Chris Sprowls. However, Chris Sprowls has his own priorities that he's going to want to negotiate. So all of these legislative items that are dramatically impactful and potentially dangerous to the environment and the people of Florida become chips that are in this game.
That's
here.
right.
And so if Chris Sprowls decides, okay, Wilton Simpson, I'll let you keep 2508 as is. I know you care about it. If you give me something else, whatever he decides is his top priority, we have to live with it. And then we end up in that situation where the only out is for the governor to veto the entire budget, in which case the whole legislature would have to reconvene to craft and agree on a new budget. So that's really the nuclear option. And we certainly hope it can be killed prior to that. Okay. And it's really important to mention that we're talking about all the lawmakers, but lobbyists in Tallahassee have tremendous power. I almost called it power Hassie.
I like that. That's accurate.
And we know, and I think Scott Wagner, who's one of your fellow governing board members, Jackie, put it very well when he picked apart this bill at your last public meeting. He said, after the governing board came to some agreement about what you wanted to do with the new Lake Okeechobee plan, Lowson as it's known, somebody got to work in Tallahassee. Somebody drafted legislation, shopped it around, and they found a willing buyer, and Wilton Simpson is what it looks like. So
Absolutely.
it is really important to remember the industries that benefit from what we're talking about, and not just the lawmakers that appear to be doing their bidding. So, okay.
Absolutely. May I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick?
Please.
And it's there's so many different things in the bill that it is very hard to explain because it's so multi-layered and there's so many things. But it's really interesting that the underlying mode is Lowson. Whoever wrote that bill, they don't like what's going on with Lowson.
That's right. And for those who don't know, Lowson is the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. This will be the new lake plan that governs water moving in and out of the lake for the next decade to come. And interestingly, in the bill, Jackie, it addresses not only the current lake plan, but any future lake plan. So
just to summarize quickly, why we're saying hold hostage for anyone who might not be clear, it's very confusing, is that if the district doesn't succumb to the requirements of the bill, they won't get their funding. And also Lowson will have to have rules that the district didn't agree to, okay, which means higher water.
That's right. And higher than needed Lake Okeechobee levels leads to toxic algae discharges as seen in 2018 and 2016 and 2013. So it is important to bring it back to that core issue. Thank you. Okay, so we're getting good comments and questions. We'll tackle some more of those as we go. But for now, Gil, so we've talked about the water shortage rules. We've talked about the 404 wetland permitting rules that are in this bill that remain very concerning. What are some of the other concerning provisions? Can you talk about the rural and family land stuff?
Right. So this also proposes some fairly significant changes to the state's Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. It's a conservation program administered by the Department of Forestry under FDACS, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. There's a number of concerns about this. Number one is the process. The fact that, this does constitute significant changes to this program and it's being ramped through. It would significantly expand the program to include land acquisition, whereas now it primarily acquires easements. And so there's some thought that, Florida already has a land acquisition program. It's called Florida Forever. And does this set up a situation where now the Department of Agriculture, who we should note the almost guaranteed to be the next agricultural commissioner here in Florida is current Senate President Wilton Simpson, who's running for that position, pretty much unopposed, I believe, and seems like a shoo-in for that position at this point. So this would sort of expand FDAC's fiefdom, so to speak. If all of a sudden FDACS is allowed to be purchasing land where previously they were just acquiring easements, and it does potentially put it in conflict with the existing Florida Forever program, how it's prioritized. There's other concerns relating to this. This legislation would remove the current preference for cattle and timbered as preferred working landscapes. Working lands like cattle ranches and timber have significant benefits as corridors for wildlife. Other agricultural commodities like row crops have fewer sort of overt benefits for corridors and have more damaging environmental impacts. This bill would allow the state to pay more than the appraised value of the land. It says the state, the final purchase price is subject to approval by the Board of Trustees, and that the final purchase price may not exceed a fair market value as determined by the department, so long as the public's interest is reasonably protected. So in other words, we could pay more for it if we want. So, there's other aspects of that as well. But once again, you're talking fairly significant changes to a fairly significant program that should have gone through the normal committee process and didn't. And, it's like with all these different aspects to this bill, I often say that, working in sort of environmental field is like being a hockey goalie. You're constantly fending off slap shots. This bill is like 4 or 5 slap shots at once, and you may deflect 1 or 2, but others are going to get through, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what this bill amounts to. It's a full-on assault is what it is.
A full-on assault.
Right. Roy, would you have anything you'd like to add on the Rural and Family Lands Program? Your reading of how that would change the law and the impact on Florida?
Right. I mean, one aspect of it allows those landowners who are in the program to use their property for conservation banks or wetland mitigation banks. And I know there's been some concern expressed about that, about the potential for double dipping. That is, that a property owner would be paid to preserve the land and then be compensated to allow them to sell these endangered species credit or wetland credits. Um, I'm not too concerned about that because it does the language in the act seems to suggest that at least for wetland mitigation banking that credits would only be developed if they've done something affirmatively good for the property. So the easements that they sign up for, they're negative easements, so they've sold the development rights. But what this does, I think, or at least a portion of it, it clarifies that the landowners, if they do further environmental improvements on the property, can sell it as an offset. But one of the things to remember is that offsets are actually offsetting impacts that are occurring somewhere else on the landscape. So it's not actually a net gain in
Right.
environmental values.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And what about this shift in priorities right now? It's ranch lands and timber, right, Gil? That is at top of the priority list for these easements. If we were prioritizing more disturbed agriculture, is there less biodiversity we're saving, Roy?
Yeah, that would be troubling as well, and that sort of goes back to the process question here, is that there wasn't an opportunity to talk through this and to provide input on this bill.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just you really wonder whose work they're doing in Tallahassee when something like this is sprung on us. Okay, so Jackie, I want to turn to you, and then we'll turn back to some of the good questions we're getting in the chat. One of the arguments that was made for this bill when it first came up, and then again when it came up on the Senate floor and as the amended version last week, was that this will just provide accountability to make sure the water management district is doing what it's supposed to do. How did that land on you, and what's your response to that?
As I kind of mentioned earlier, the organizational structure of the government, of which our top leaders should be very aware of. The districts, the water management districts, fall under the executive branch. So it was insulting to me to have the legislature threaten the district, when I'm not under them in the organizational chart. And I found it, it's a power play is what it is. They want something. And I think that, I have to just, I'm on a great board, and I was so impressed by all of the things that everyone, I liked full on assault that Gil just said, but we were a totally unified front against it when it came to the South Florida Water Management District, from staff to the board. And we stay with the governor. That is how it works. And sure, we are independent and we are allowed to say what we want, but it's a political world. And under that umbrella, we fall under the governor. The legislature is saying, we give you the money. We give you the money, whatever 70%, or it's not that, it's 30%, or it's high. And so they're saying, we give you the money, we should be able to tell you what to do. In the United States of America, under, there is a balance of power. That is not the way it works. And they should be speaking to the governor in a respectful manner if they have issues. And the district will be dealing with the governor and the legislature, but organizationally, we fall underneath the governor.
Mm-hmm. And I think a bit of recent political history might be in order now, and maybe many people listening will remember this. But after DeSantis was elected, he cleaned house on the Water Management District Governing Board and asked for the resignations of every member. The new board is all newly appointed by him. And I have to think that some of folks in Tallahassee who didn't feel so good about that are seeking some remedy now through their own means, if you will. So
right. And I just have to say that even though we were all voted in as the first environmental board, I think if you look at anything we've done, we have been balanced and fair. We have listened to everybody, especially including agriculture.
Yeah, sometimes we think you don't go far enough.
I know.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
But can I say quickly, though,
yes.
this was characterized as an attempt to hold the district accountable. Is there any evidence that the district thus far has been unaccountable? I mean, is there any, are other water management districts, quote unquote, held accountable in a similar manner? I think the way that Jackie characterized it, she used the term threat. And I think that's an accurate assessment. I think this was almost an attempt to intimidate, that we're going to write these rules that handcuff you, that require you to, make recommendations or engage in water management that benefits one party above all other parties. You're going to do what we say, or you're not going to get any money. I mean, that's, that's basically what it amounted to. It amounted to an attempt to intimidate and or extort. I mean, those are sort of crude terms. But would you disagree with that, Jackie?
No, I agree. I agree. And I don't know. I don't think I can say the words that I'd like to say right now about that. I am disappointed because I love my country and I love my state. And I was a teacher and I taught students, and I know the young people are watching, and we need to set an example in everything we do, not threaten each other.
Thank you for that honesty. I think one other thing the bill does, especially as it relates to Lake Okeechobee management, is it preserves in amber these water shortage rules that really benefit the sugar industry south of the lake above all others. Those rules were adopted by the South Florida Water Management District in 2007. Rules need to be updated periodically, and this would preserve them forevermore in any future lake plan. So we are working hard to kill that bad provision of the bill in particular, because first of all, who knows what the future of climate in Florida holds in terms of water management. So we need the ability to be flexible. And secondly, the 500,000 acres of sugarcane south of Lake Okeechobee have been at the top of the list for decades. And it is time to have not just balance, which is what the language of the bill now calls for, balancing interests. Actually, we need to make up for very lost time in terms of damaging our ecosystems, our estuaries, and depriving the Southern Everglades of water. So we do have some more questions here. I was going to ask you, Gil, about how we can kill this bill. We kind of already addressed it. It's related to either addressing it through conferencing right now in the legislature and reaching out to our lawmakers as individuals to ask them to take this out during conferencing, or a veto from DeSantis of he can't line item veto this. He would have to veto the whole budget. This isn't just funding for a project he can line item. Somebody, let's see, Wayne Mills would like a list of objections that we can share with other environmental coalitions to encourage Governor DeSantis to veto the budget. So we do have that list. We'll be happy to share it. And Friends of the Everglades also put out a targeted action about a week ago. It actually predates the amendment to this bill, but it still holds true in terms of our objections. And we will put that in the chat so people who want to fill it out can send it to their lawmakers. You type in your address, it goes to your lawmaker. So far, almost 1,800 people have sent that message, or 1,800 messages have been sent. Okay, we'll tackle some more questions here. Can the federal government and or Army Corps go to court to protect the Lowson process should this get passed and not vetoed? Roy, do you have a take on that one?
I think it's unlikely they would go to court. I think it's something that would be negotiated out because the whole water management structure is one of discussions and negotiations between the state and the feds. So litigation is a rather blunt instrument. I think that would be an unlikely scenario.
Right. And for those who don't know, the Army Corps of Engineers has its congressionally authorized purposes for managing the lake. And those are primarily at the forefront when the lake is high. So the integrity of the Herbert Hoover Dike is a major concern for them. Navigation, recreation is in there too. And in recent years, because of the terrible toxic algae blooms we've experienced, they have been thinking more about how to prevent toxic algae blooms, even though it's not in their original congressionally authorized purposes. When the lake gets to lower levels, the Army Corps does generally defer to the Water Management District, which controls the southern gates from the lake. And it is a dance, a negotiation we see. They take input. And that actually leads to a question I saw in the chat that I think I'll pose to you, Jackie. John Casani asked why the South Florida Water Management District wants more authority over Lowson during the water shortage management ban. And then he asked what new regulations would 2508 create related to water supply permitting. So maybe if you want to tackle the first half of that, I think John is referring to the 1.5 foot buffer zone request. Do you want to talk about how that relates to this bill?
Okay, so this is probably something the district would tell me not to answer, but I'm going to do the best I can.
This is transparency.
I'm not going to ignore a question from John of all great people. Basically, I know it's a hard pill, and it's a hard pill for me too, you guys and gals. But sometimes you have to look at the history of the water management districts. And, you want to change things overnight, but that is not how things work. And the South Florida Water Management District was originally the Everglades Drainage District. Then it was the Central and South Florida Flood Control District. Then it became the South Florida Water Management District. But the running themes all those times, let's face it, it wasn't to protect the environment. It was flood control and water supply. Okay, that's the truth of it. And it is not in Florida code, and it is something the district is responsible for. And so I personally I'm not answering the question, but I'm saying I don't try to fight that. If we have obligations, we have obligations, okay, to water supply and everything else. What I try to fight for is the environment on top of that and around that, and by inspiring people to be fair. And I'm always saying we're not in 1948. We're not in 1948. The whole world isn't built to, for water supply, for agriculture. We cannot live like that anymore. We have to adjust. We have to change the way we grow things and do things. And so do we here on the coast with the fertilizer and all the junk going into the rivers. So I think the district is just staying true to its historical self. It's not an insult. And where I try to embrace more and still respect the historical component of it. So I hope that answers. And there's a lot of pressure from ag and water supply because they've had it for 50 years, 60, 70, 80 years. You have to work on those things slow. And but I agree. I mean, I'm on this board to be an environmentalist, and that's who I am. But I can't ignore what something was made for. It would be like if you were trying to change maybe a school system or something. It's like you have a lot of stuff that started 100 years ago, so you have to work through that stuff.
A little background on this question at hand. So earlier this year, the start of this year, the South Florida Water Management District issued a request to the Army Corps of Engineers to have explicit control or reliance, that the Army Corps of Engineers would have explicitly rely on the Water Management District 1.5 feet above what's known as the water shortage management band of the lake. That's essentially drought conditions. That line delineates drought conditions. Actually, we at Friends of the Everglades, John Casani, the Calusa waterkeeper who just asked a question, and some other allies, we objected to that because not because of Jackie sitting on the board today, but because we were worried that enshrining that additional control could be used for ill purposes in the future. If a future governing board appointed by any governor is more sympathetic to the needs of agriculture and not sympathetic to the environment, they could use that extra 1.5 feet of lake management to harm the environment, even worse than it's been harmed today. So that's why we objected. This bill doesn't, specifically address that, but that is kind of playing in the background.
Right. Well,
And
that
two-
had happened, and then this bill came, and we all forgot about the 1.5, and we're just dealing with the bill. But it is all there somewhere in the wash.
But it's almost like a 1-2 punch. For a little additional context here, at the hearing, the sole hearing on this, Eric Eichenberg, who's the CEO of the Everglades Foundation, got up, and they had been Kathleen Passidomo, who's going to be the next Senate president after Wilton Simpson leaves, was talking to the one guy from Captains for Clean Water, saying, "Well, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this." And we were under the impression that the environmental community was on board with these changes because there was a meeting. Eichenberg got up and he pitched his prepared remarks, and he said, "I knew this was going to be mischaracterized." He says we were summoned, and that was the term he used. They were summoned to a meeting with Passidomo, Wilton Simpson, and the sugar industry, and told essentially this is what we want. Okay. And that included, and as I understood his comments, that included the 1.5 foot buffer zone, and that there was an agreement that the 1.5 foot buffer zone would then, become a thing, and that's where that came from. But Eichenberg was saying the rest of this, the rest of this bill, we had no idea.
I have
not in agreement.
no knowledge of that
Right.
at all.
That's just what came of his.
Where that 1.5 would have had to come back to the board,
Mhm.
and it would have been discussed.
Mhm.
And that never happened because this bill came out, and now here we are in Hiroshima,
Yeah.
Right. So it is February 23rd. Session officially ends on March 11th, and the next few weeks are going to be really intense. In fact, we're hearing that they already are in Tallahassee because of this clash and others. So, even though all three branches of our state government, well, two, I'll say, are controlled by the Republican Party, there's some really significant infighting on this topic. So we do have an opportunity still. We have to be optimists in this work to contact our lawmakers to let them know that this kind of governance is not okay, both the method by which the bill was advanced and what it continues to contain. So we did put that targeted action in the chat. You can fill that out. It will go to your individual local state House member and state senator. Let them know that you're not supportive of this bill 2508. All right, we'll tackle a few more questions here as we have time. Okay, here's another one from Charles Grandy. Jackie, this is for you. You're getting put on the spot a little bit today, and we appreciate you indulging us. He says, will the South Florida Water Management District strongly recommend to the governor that he veto the budget rather than accept these terms?
I can say, Mr. Grande, that Cheryl Meads, who is on our board, has already screamed from the dais for that. She screamed from the dais for that. I think that you have to respect the office of the governor, and I believe that the governor knows exactly how we feel about this, and I will leave it in his hands.
Thank you for tackling that one. All right. Roy, I have a question for you. So much of how we manage water and how we permit wetland, 404 permits, dredge and fill permitting affects our wildlife in Florida. And since your expertise is biodiversity, I just was hoping you'd say a few words about how all of this bureaucratic mess that we're dissecting here translates into the natural habitat of Florida that human beings depend on. I know that's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, we can sort of get lost in the minutia of the regulations and the legislation and the personalities involved.
Right.
But ultimately, you sort of need to step back every now and then and say, well, what's the overall goal? What's the overall objective? And it's to protect our environment and our natural resources, um, not only for their intrinsic worth, but for us and the benefits we derive from them, and to ensure that they're there for the next generations. And I mean, one of the things that I like to do when I'm in uh, in in meetings where sometimes you get to bogged down in these details is to sort of flash up on the screen a picture of my students in Big Cypress
Right.
and say, hey, this is, just a reminder, this is what it's about. This is what we're trying to protect.
Yes.
I think that is very brilliantly put. Thank you. It's funny. We send out regular emails at Friends of the Everglades. Those of you who are on our list will know once a month we send out an email called Everglades Zen that our communications director Allie Hartman puts together, and it's a snapshot of a beautiful image or moment in the Everglades, and we get more positive responses to that email than anything else. All of this hard work that we do, and we have to do it. But people need to be reminded. And I think the way you answered that question really does that. Thank you, Roy. Okay. We have some questions here related to contributions from the sugar industry to these politicians. I'm gonna leave that one for another day. Actually, I'm gonna let Gil tackle that with his vote water work because it's not exactly in the purview of Friends of the Everglades. However, being aware of the powerful forces of money and special interests and the access is really critical and something we can talk about. We talked about the sugar industry. Let's name names. Florida Crystals and U.S. Sugar own most of those 500,000 acres south of the lake, and this legislation stands to directly benefit them. Florida Power and Light also appears to directly benefit from this as a utility that could pay to expedite its permitting. So it is important to name names. And Gil, I'll leave it to you and Vote Water to play the hard ball, as Jackie said earlier.
Absolutely. That's what we're there for.
Okay. So with just the few minutes we have left, we heard some beautiful, I think, kind of summarizing remarks from Roy. I'm going to ask you, Gil, and you, Jackie, to just kind of put a bow on this. How should we be thinking in this home stretch here? We'll start with you, Gil.
At this point, the most effective thing the folks listening to this can do is to contact their legislator directly and make their displeasure known. Because as noted, there's not going to be another opportunity for the public to weigh in here. Now, if ultimately what emerges from the budget conference includes all these bad provisions we've been talking about, then it may be time, and I'm sure there will be discussions as to whether Governor DeSantis should be urged to veto the budget. But for now, because you're not going to get an opportunity to weigh in, another formal opportunity to weigh in, if you feel strongly about this, you should be weighing in via emails or phone calls to your local legislator. Be polite, of course, but let them know that you don't approve of this, you don't approve of the contents of this, and you don't approve of the way this was handled. Again, to me, as bad as this bill is, and this is among the worst bills I think we've seen, it's just a grab bag, a basket of terrible stuff, pretty much, that should have gone through the regular committee process. But as egregious as the bill itself is, the process, and again, I'll go back to Governor DeSantis' term, the way this was rammed through is something that should offend every Floridian. That major governing decisions are being made this way with a concerted attempt to avoid public input and to avoid public scrutiny ought to offend everybody. Too often, that's how our government operates. It should not be that way. And the only way it won't be that way is if people raise their voice against it.
Well put, Gil. Thank you so much. Jackie, parting words from you?
I have to show my triangle, even though it doesn't totally make sense in this environment. And this is something that I bring up at the South Florida Water Management District a lot. And as awful as all of this is, the truth of the matter is we are never going to change things for the better unless we work together. We have to work together. And so, the triangle is for the district is the South Florida Water Management District, the DEP, and FDACS. And you have to think about all of the staff that kind of gets caught in the middle of all of this politics. And so I urge everyone to not build walls and to not be hateful and to not be judgmental, because in the end, it's really not how we're going to win. Talk to the people who you consider your enemy. Call up the people who you think may have put this bill together and say, what are you doing? Why didn't you just come to the meetings and talk about it? What's going on? And yes, a personal email to the governor's office, to your local legislatures will move mountains. If they see the same type of email again and again and again, they ignore it. I saw it with the Constitution Revision Commission. A small personal email, 2 lines, is something that is really more heartfelt. And there are people behind all of these crazy walls that we have built in this strange time that we're in. So don't give up the fight, and don't fight with everyone. Try to win through building relationships and breaking down barriers. We have come so far. It is unbelievable what we have achieved since 2013. We have moved mountains. We have changed the direction of the South Florida Water Management District and the governor's office itself. Now we have to work on the legislature, but let's keep going. Don't give up, and love over hate.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. I can't thank you enough for caring about the matters we're talking about now and for staying engaged. So please be in touch with your lawmakers. I think Jackie's advice is good. Don't just send the form letter. That might help, but also call and give a personal message. And the spirit of Maggie Herchala, who we talked about today and who was a personal mentor for me, I'll say, get out there on the water, maybe paddle in your kayak or hop on your paddleboard and remember what this fight is all about. So thank you all. We'll join you again next month for another Clean Water Conversation. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.